Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Just like start waving like crazy if you can't. My name is Shreya. I am the developer advocate for Auth0 for startups. And we're going to talk about security considerations for AI web developers. Before I get started, this is a quick slide from legal that says that if I make any forward-looking statements, don't hold me accountable, please. And a warning that says that if I give you any advice, it's not advice, they're just considerations to take in place. I have a note on this in a second as well. But yeah, just a quick intro before I dive into like the real meat of the content. I love startups. I had previously co-founded a nonprofit, and I worked there for a few years, worked at a Series B startup for a couple years, and then now I work at Okta to serve our startup community, super early stage startups. I love the founders that we work with, and my goal is to basically just like bridge the gap between the resources that we have at Okta to them to make sure they're successful in their implementation and anything else that they need. So why are we talking about security considerations? When I started working at Okta, I realized that all of the tools that we use, I don't know how many of you actually work at large companies versus small businesses, but at a large company, the vetting process to actually be able to use new tools can be kind of insane. You end up going through a lot of like processes that say, hey, you're not allowed to access this tool at all. And then after a couple months, you're like, oh, okay, I can finally access this, but I gotta like log in every single second to be able to do it. I guess maybe that's an Okta thing, I don't know. But yeah, that made me realize that working at a startup can look very different than working at a large corporation. And like you saw the two legal slides, we have a whole team that's dedicated to making sure that when we're using these tools, especially AI tools, we're doing them securely. But if you're a small business, you might not have the time and resources to be able to dedicate to that. So that's the main reason we're talking about this. I've gotten a chance to speak to these folks, a lot of founders and engineering leadership, and they've shared essentially considerations that they're taking, questions that they're asking when they start using AI tools. And so I wanted to share that with all of you today. And this is the set of topics we're going to quickly touch over. So productivity versus risk, risk prevention strategies, and then a quick note on learning more from founders. So yeah, let's get into productivity versus risk. Could I get just like a quick shout out for how you guys define productivity for engineering teams? Anything? Could it be like reducing code efficiency or like increasing code efficiency, the time that you spend coding, something like that? I'm seeing a couple of nods, so I'm hoping I'm on the right track. We know that using AI tools can look very different at different types of companies. And so these are some of the considerations that folks are saying that they take into when they're talking about productivity. Going to market faster is another one, and improving their actual code quality in less time is another one. And then once you start using AI tools, the goal is to basically be able to go from idea to MVP as quickly as possible with limited resources. But then what are the risks when we're doing all of this, right? What should you be thinking about? This depends on something called risk tolerance, which is pretty understandable the way it's phrased. But your risk tolerance can depend on your industry or your product type and use case or your company stage. So if you're a really early stage startup, you have a very high risk tolerance. You're able to take a lot more risks to be quick. Versus if you're at a large like security company, you're going to have a much lower risk tolerance. And then just sort of like comparing those two concepts against each other. Like I said, if you're a startup in growth mode, you're going to want to move quickly and take more risks versus an enterprise security company wouldn't necessarily be the same. Now, the following are risk prevention strategies. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but I will share a deck afterwards that you can use if you want to take notes. These are not AI generated. OWASP, I don't know if you're familiar with it, is a nonprofit that's dedicated to helping companies understand potential software risks. And so they've released a list of potential security risks. A few of them are on the screen right now, and you can go to their website and check out the full list of top 10 security risks. But now we're going to get into the actual considerations that folks are saying they take into consideration. So the first set is on PI and copyright concerns. Code ownership. When you're asking ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot or any tool that you're using to generate code for you, is it you that owns the code, or is it the tool itself that generated it, right? Larger companies tend to have contracts with these other models to make sure that the large company owns the code. If you're a smaller business and you're just going directly into your personal account, generating the code, can you be sure that you actually own it? Can you run into any legal issues further down the line by using that code? Code duplication is, how do you know that that same piece of code is not being given to your competitors, right? Could you run into any issues there? Maybe not, and maybe that's a risk you're willing to take. And monitoring data. So if your customers start using your AI tools and they happen to feed it information about their own data, how do you know that that's not then being shared with your competitors or other folks in the industry? How are you protecting them? The second set of questions is on over-reliance. So that's more of like an internal strategy thing, right? How familiar are you with the code? It doesn't really matter that much if you're only generating a few lines of code at a time. But the moment you start generating files and files of code, how do you know that you or your engineers are really just like reviewing all of the code and are familiar with it? What if there's a bunch of information in there that you don't want to have? I don't know if you're familiar with hallucinations. Quick overview is that AI models can generate outputs that are not accurate. For example, if I ask, hey, AI tool, where's the help center? I would expect it to take me to help.auth0.com, but instead it says, hey, go to the Fairmont Hotel in the back closet, there's a help center there, right? So how do you know that these AI tools are not going to lead you, your engineers, your customers, to get the wrong answers or something that's inaccurate? And then are you implementing any review processes in your code? Are you updating your code review process to make sure that all of the above are taken into account? And last but not least, data exposure, which I think is the biggest one, and I'm sure you've considered it to some extent. But how do you know that your data isn't being exposed to your competitors? What strategies are you taking into account to make sure that this data isn't getting leaked out? And what policies are you implementing on a more employee level at your company, as well as what tools are you implementing in your code base to make sure that this data isn't getting leaked? It's a lot of repetitive natures, but the answers to all of these questions can be very different. If you want to read more, there's a blog on it, and here's a QR code to the slide deck if you want to go check it out later. And I'll be at the Okta booth if you have any questions, or if you have any expertise in this area and want to teach me or come talk to me about it. But yeah, thank you so much.